Good Saturday morning, everyone. Today on Perspectives, Americans are having to come to terms with some very sensitive and polarizing beliefs and attitudes when it comes to race relations in the United States. The death of George Floyd due to the actions of Minneapolis, Minnesota police officers on May the 25th sparked protests across the globe. Floyd was pinned under an officer's knee for nearly 9 minutes, his cries for help ignored. It has led citizens now, as well as government leaders, to question what some say is the use of excessive force by law enforcement and the perceived lack of police accountability. While the protests began in Minneapolis, they have grown to include now more than 400 cities in all 50 states and in the international community. The Gulf Coast was no exception. Mobilians gathered for a vigil and rally on Sunday, May 31st. A march also started at Mardi Gras Park. It was a peaceful march through downtown Mobile. In Cathedral Square, a peaceful vigil was also taking place. But a group that was marching also broke away. Demonstrators surged past a police barricade and made their way onto the I-10 ramp in downtown Mobile. It became a standoff with police who were trying to keep the protesters from reaching the interstate. After repeated warnings for the group to move back, police fired tear gas into the crowd. Now, there were no injuries or arrests, but the window of an MPD vehicle was smashed. After things calmed down, Mobile Mayor Sandy Stimpson and Police Chief Lawrence Batiste and other political leaders met with protesters that day at Mardi Gras Park. They talked one-on-one with people and promised to keep the dialogue going. The mayor said that he would continue to meet with community leaders in the coming weeks. Joining us this morning, Mobile Public Safety Director James Barber and Mobile Police Chief Lawrence Batiste. We'll also talk to Kimberly and Jordan Pettway, the organizers of the George Floyd Vigil and Rally that was held over the Memorial Day weekend at Mobile's Cathedral Square. The calls for police reform are being heard as many cities doing away with tactics like the chokeholds and pushing law enforcement agencies to be more transparent and accountable. A lot to explore and talk about. Stay tuned this morning as Perspectives continues after this break. Joining us on Perspectives this morning, Mobile Public Safety Director James Barber and Mobile Police Chief Lawrence Batiste. Gentlemen, thank you both for being a part of the discussion and dialogue this morning.
Thank you for having us, Eric.
Thanks for having us, Eric.
If you both would share for us your thoughts after seeing the video of George Floyd's arrest.
Well, I'll be glad to, Eric. I mean, I share, and we've obviously discussed this among law enforcement. We saw the improper use of force during prone restraint with compression added to the back and neck, even after warning that that George Floyd could not breathe. And so it raises the question of the officer's continued use of that type of restraint. We know that it's improper. He should have been moved onto his side or into a sitting position. And, you know, the question still remains is the other officers and why there was no intervention.
And Chief?
And I would echo the sentiments of Director Barber. I've had an opportunity to speak with many chiefs around the country to talk about what they saw, and I know what I saw was not pleased with, and that does not accurately represent law enforcement, in my opinion, based off what I've been taught across the years. So I think you've seen an outcry by police chiefs across this country talking about the behavior of the officers and the fact that they did not support such use within their departments.
And you both are veteran law enforcement officers of experience in many capacities. How do you weed out the bad officers? We hear that dialogue, you know, for years about, we know that we've got bad apples in every profession, as you mentioned, Director Barber, as we were talking. How do you weed out these bad officers so that events of this type do not happen and end up reflecting on the whole police force?
Well, you know, it's always the challenge is when you have these heavy turnovers within law enforcement agencies, especially in municipal government. So you have as many as 60 brand new officers every year here in Mobile alone that are hitting the street. And so we do an incredible amount of screening as far as psychological screening up in the very front to try to make sure we're doing absolutely the best we can to screen them as they come into recruit training and then on to field training. And then we continue to monitor the first year in a probationary status. What oftentimes happens happens after that is they get beyond the probationary status, and then they become tenured employees. And so there's a due process system, a civil service system that we have to go through. Very difficult, very cumbersome. And oftentimes, even though we as law enforcement professionals identify what could possibly be a bad individual that shouldn't, maybe not the right temperament to be a police officer, we take some corrective action as far as early intervention to try to correct that behavior. But in the civil service system, often agencies are pretty much hobbled until that person does something bad enough to cause him to be terminated in the civil service. So that's why you see some incidents occur with officers that should not be on the job.
And when you look at that, Chief Batiste, the process that seems to be there is something in place protocol-wise, but you hear about this particular officer, someone said that there were at least 10 to 20 write-ups on him about his performance of duty. So how do you stop it from becoming that extensive before being able to remove him from, at least from the streets, to where he wouldn't be interacting with the public?
So Eric, as you know, that question has been posed to me a number of times, and you know, as an administrator, executive within the department, you know, one of my responsibilities is when we have a person that have disciplinary issues to occur, is to kind of look at what has occurred holistically. You know, we're talking about the potentially 18 to 20 different write-ups with this particular officer. It would not surprise me that maybe some of these write-ups may have came at the front end of his or her career. Also would not surprise me is the fact that if we were looking at a profile of an MPD officer, if you looked at that profile, you would probably see some vehicle accidents that probably should not be in there. So I think from a holistic standpoint, I think you have to look at the totality of what you have, and that 18 number or that 20 number may not be a good representation of what actually occurred within that officer's career. I think you have to look at it retrospectively and look at what's there. And so I don't want to make a rush to judgment based off someone saying 18 different encounters and not knowing what each and every one of those encounters were, because again, I do know that when our officers have a vehicle accident, that goes in their profile. I know that sometimes when people complain on our officers, they may come back as an unfounded incident. And so in those situations, I think we have to look at it from a holistic perspective of understanding what was the write-up about and what was the outcome of the write-up.
Do fellow officers have any input to be able to say and come to their chief or their captain or, of course, Director Barber to say, I have serious concerns about another officer?
I'm glad I'd like to respond to that first, because over the last couple of years, we've had in our training academy, we had young officers that are fresh out of the academy to really step up and come forward if they saw something that they thought was inappropriate or contrary to what they had been taught in the academy. And so I'm extremely proud of the fact that our officers, in particularly some of our younger officers, understand that, hey, look, I can speak up. And again, you know, I've always had an open door policy. When I began working for MPD, the director and myself have always kind of made ourselves available to every man and woman that works for MPD. So if they're afraid to say something at the bottom, they're certainly not afraid to say something to the top, because we've always made ourselves accessible to young officers within MPD.
With both of you all having been in both the Sheriff's Department as well as law enforcement from the police side in this area, do you feel that there is a racism issue? They're seeing this around the country, where systemic in some aspects on police forces. Do you feel that we've got that issue here in Mobile County?
Well, you know, on the issue of systemic racism in law enforcement agencies, no, not here in Mobile County, not in Mobile PD. I think what a lot of people view as systemic racism are a lot of the tactics that have historically been used by the police. And, you know, if you go back far enough in history, there was certainly some racist type activity that occurred within our law enforcement, and a lot of people have never forgotten that. But today's modern police force, the 21st century models that we use, the type of training they go through, we have slowly moved modern policing way away from a lot of the tactics that cause people to believe and certainly perceive that black neighborhoods were being targeted black people. And so, or even, not even just here, but people of color in other jurisdictions.
And I guess my response to that would be simply that as far as MPD is concerned, I don't see a culture of systemic racism that exists within MPD. We have incidents that prospectively people will allege that race is a reason why something may have occurred. But again, there's never been an incident that I've been made aware of, or somebody else within MPD has been made aware of, that was not thoroughly investigated, and the outcome presented back to the individual that may have made the complaint. Race is not one of our leading incident causes when we get internal affairs complaint within MPD. And I know people often say, well, they're afraid to make reports about law enforcement officers. But what I say to that is this, is that I'm not aware of one single case where someone alleged that they were being harassed by MPD over the last 2 or 3 years that we've investigated, and that it was determined that the officer was doing what they alleged occurred. And so I think that we have to not take what we're just hearing from a national perspective and say, attach it to what we're doing here locally. We've spent a lot of time over the last 6 years building relationships in the community, and while we are receptive and responsive to what's happening nationally, it also drives our approach to how we police. How do we become better? How do we make sure that that's not a problem within the city of Mobile?
One quick final question here, and of course never enough time, but a lot of dialogue and discussion going on around the country about what's next. We're talking about people defunding and getting rid of police. Also Congress talking about certain things they want to see in place. In your opinions, both of you, where should we go next with law enforcement after using this as a barometer moment?
You know, I think we continue to build legitimacy and trust. The whole issue of defunding the police is counterproductive and counterintuitive to what we should be doing. But we should be increasing the funding of police to make sure that we are attracting, recruiting, training, and equipping the absolute best our society can actually retain. And so if we do a better job on the quality control of police officers, the retention of police officers, the training of police officers, we can avoid some of these incidents where these bad apples sometimes slip into an organization and call into question an entire profession. And you know, we spoke earlier, Eric, about, you know, you have bad apples in every profession. You've got bad doctors. It doesn't mean you quit going to the doctor. And so we have to do a better job of making sure that we're getting the right people with the right temperament that are in the policing field. And those are my thoughts. So they're counterintuitive to what this defunding conversation is going on.
Chief Batiste?
My perspective is exactly the same as the director. I don't see where there's any real value or gain in talking about defunding. I think one of the biggest issues that exists while we have some of the high turnover with law enforcement some of the time is because of the equity, the disparity in pay and what you're paying officers to do the job that they do. If you're looking to try to make sure that you get the very best, you have to be willing to pay for the very best. And so too many times we think about the burden that we place on law enforcement. Director Barber has said this for years, is that we sit at the tip of the spear of what happens in our community, where it used to be the parents, the church, the schools, all of them were the things that people came in contact first within our community. Now they're coming into contact with law enforcement first. We're dealing with a culture of people, in some cases, people not being taught the proper mechanism of respect at home, and that transcends that when they get out in the community, they're not respecting their teachers, they're not respecting law enforcement because we have to engage. We're dealing with mental health issues, and all those things are things that typically, until the last 6 years ago, that law enforcement were really not taking the lead in. Today, we take the lead in addressing many of those issues. So if you want to talk about defunding, I think what you really need to think about is how do you provide tools and assets so that you can continue to enhance and improve the quality of officers that we put on the street, because I guarantee you that there are more good things that law enforcement officers do each and every day than bad things.
Chief Lawrence Batiste and Public Safety Director James Barber. Gentlemen, we thank you both for coming and sharing this morning.
Again, thank you for having us, Eric.
Thanks again, Eric.
And once again, our Public Safety Director of Mobile, James Barber, and Mobile Police Chief Lawrence Batiste. And when we come back this morning, we'll talk to Kimberly and Jordan PETTWAY. They organized the George Floyd Vigil and Rally that was held over the Memorial Day weekend at Mobile's Cathedral Square. Perspectives continues in just a moment. And our guests this morning, Kim and Jordan Pettway. And ladies, tell me, what about the video of seeing George Floyd that motivated you to organize a vigil in Mobile?
I think seeing the video just really highlighted the inequities that we see in our society, and the boldness of the officers to disregard Mr. Floyd's request because he could not breathe. The level of insensitivity, it's not as if we haven't seen these things before, but this one was just different. I think it was so visible and surreal. There's no way anyone could not see the injustice there. So I think it was just because of how dehumanizing it was, I would say. Jordan?
Right.
And for you, Jordan?
Really, honestly, I couldn't even watch the full video. Like, I exited out the video, and I signed petitions on change.org. So I happened to be going through my email, and they had already made a petition for the case. And I just said, like, when I looked at it, I just began to cry because I really couldn't believe that had actually happened. Like my mom was saying, it's such a dehumanizing thing, you know, to watch, like, to see somebody doing that. It was just, I'm speechless still to this day, because it was just really, it was a crazy thing to see.
Unbelievable. I'm sure both of you were thinking that when you saw that. Now, how much effort did it take to organize a vigil from that point of being struck by what had happened and wanting to not just watch it, but do something else, do something next?
We literally organized the vigil in 2 days. Yep. Jordan, when she called me crying, I knew that we had to do something to honor Mr. Floyd, and that was really our focus, just honoring him and the others that we've lost unjustly. And so I said, Jordan, hey, will you put together a flyer? And I learned that she had these amazing graphic skills that I did not know anything about. So she put together that flyer. We started to circulate it. You know, the city was very responsive and helpful, you know, in ensuring that we got our permit. Shonda with Parks and Recreation was great helping us there. And ladies that I have met throughout Mobile, in a Sisters Love Circle, a little group that I just started on Facebook so that as women we can celebrate one another. I reached out to a few of them, and we just pushed forward and made it happen.
Now, when you all saw the makeup of the crowd there at Cathedral Square, what were your thoughts? Were you surprised about the diversity?
I won't say that I was surprised. I was a little shocked. Like when one of my colleagues walked up to me, I was like, wow, like, how did you know? I think that was the surprising, that it managed to circulate throughout Mobile so fast.
Yes, that was very surprising. I mean, I knew that we were going to have a great turnout because I was, you know, hoping and believing that. But when we got there and people started to arrive, I will say I was surprised at just how many people were present.
You know, it surprised me because I'm a little older than both of you, and having been aware of the civil rights movement from the day, most of the non-people of color in the old days had to come in from other parts of the country, but you literally had local people, broad diversity, and so I was very pleased to see that as compared to what I remember from the old days. So it definitely was a great sight to see. Now, while you're in the midst of something like that, in that kind of moment, can you sense what direction the group and the vigil is going next? Because some things developed later. Can you get a sense of something is about to happen next?
Yeah, what we did really was try to coordinate the times that the vigil was held following the protest and the march, because both were very important. You know, there's a time to honor, there's a time to protest, there's a time to march, and so neither one of us, those who organized the march as well as us, did not want to interfere with one another. So when the march came over to Cathedral Square the second time, now the first time they marched around earlier, we were not there. But by the time they came back the second time, we welcomed the marchers. You know, we had water. We wanted to see what they needed. They were still chanting, and while our event was a bit more quiet and, you know, sort of a memorial, their chanting was fine until we got the vigil started. And so the group was still, protesting, saying Black Lives Matter. And I just noticed that somehow there was an uproar. Something happened where the group just got really loud, and I saw them kind of circling some people. And I would later learn that those were some gentlemen that were part of a motorcycle group who had, for the second time, began to antagonize the group, yelling things at them. And so that's when they took off again. And that's when you saw it turn into, a group of individuals just kind of marching randomly throughout downtown that ultimately led to the bridge incident. I would say
go ahead. When you look at, go ahead, Jordan. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it was really peaceful before that incident. Like she was saying, everybody was just crowding around and chanting, everything was like really peaceful before the incident took place.
Yes. Now, as you look at it from hindsight, is there any way to control something like that from going in the direction that it went when you're seeing that thing and the momentum and the group moving in a different direction? Is there any way to control that?
I would say one way would be to ignore the people who are obviously there to get you upset, to agitate you, because, I feel like you could take this with life. There are going to be people who are just going to be present to do just that and get you off of your game anywhere, you may go. So I just feel like one thing we have to remember, especially during a time like this, is just try to keep calm and, just think about the reason that you're there while you're doing this, rather than giving them the satisfaction of making you upset or seeing you agitated. So I feel like that's one way to definitely keep things more calm and not allow them to turn left.
Yeah, we can't, you can't control what outside people are going to come do in a public environment. The only thing we can control is ourselves. And so, we have to make sure that we educate and train those who are protesting and marching about the possibilities this may arise and how to respond when that arises. We were also, I think, trying to play music to calm the crowd a little bit. We were trying to be creative when we saw them agitated, but it had already happened.
Well, as we close out, is this the end, or we have future things planned?
Absolutely not the end.
Definitely not the end at all.
No way. So this was my ushering her into activism. She's lived a life of activism. She's been marching since she's about 6 or so. But she's moving. Her friends are mobilizing. We have a weekly Zoom that we do online, dismantling the racialized narrative in America. So we're doing that. We're also working to try to honor Black businesses in the area, provide opportunities for others to come out and see the work that they do, because sustainability, economic sustainability in our community is very important. Jordan participated in a meeting with the mayor's office. She was able to go to that. I called in. And also, just this morning, we had a conversation with Chief Batiste, who did an incredible job just during the march and the vigil. And so Jordan will be going to speak with him, with some of her peers, and we're busy. We're moving.
Well, we thank you both for taking. Well, we thank you both for taking time to share with us this day and the information. And of course, we encourage people to look for your Facebook, as well as, I believe, is there a Zoom also that they can find out more information about what's going on. Kim and Jordan Petway, we thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And once again, we thank the mother and daughter team, Kimberly and Jordan Petway. They organized the George Floyd Vigil at Mobile's Cathedral Square. Next up on Perspectives, we continue to talk to our local leaders who are working to respond to these recent incidents and challenges. The presidents of the Mobile County and Baldwin County NAACP organizations will share their concerns about police brutality and the changes they want to see. We'll also talk to the Mobile County and Baldwin County sheriffs. Both are veteran law enforcement officers who will tell us their opinions about the George Floyd's death by police officer involvement. They will also share the changes they want to see made in law enforcement and what they believe can be done to improve relations with all of the citizens they serve. So join us next Saturday morning at 9 for Perspectives as we discuss those important issues and seek solutions. We thank you very much for joining us.